Okay, here I am starting on top of my very loose drawing that I did in China marker on Pastel Premier. And I'm using one of the little palette knife tools, soft tools with, I guess it's a pointy oval shape. There's three different, or actually four different shapes. There is a square shape. There's this kind of rounded shape, which is great for petals. There's a pointy shape, and I think there's one other shape. Maybe there's only three. I'm not sure. Anyway, I'm doing my darks. Since I'm working on a lighter paper here, I'm establishing my darks. So I'm using some of the red iron oxide extra dark, and I guess it's whatever the darkest magenta extra dark, and a few others, and I probably even have a black in there to get those darks. So I'm starting to establish the light and dark contrast in the flowers, mostly the darks, because sometimes I can't get light enough with the pans, and I save the really light lights and the really dark darks for the end, and I will use a pastel stick. So here I'm using one of the sponges that has a pointy end, one of my favorite ones. And I'm dipping in multiple colors at this point. I'm actually even using the same sponge over and over again, and I'm just wiping it off on a towel. And so I'm kind of mixing my colors here. So there's like a darker orange is kind of on the greenish side that I mix with the other orange, and I just keep kind of intuitively going in there and lightening it up or darkening. If I'm like, okay, it needs to be greener, I add a little bit of the muted green, or I'll add a little violet until it makes the color that I want. And I don't really think about this too much. I'm just knowing I need a color that looks like this, and I kind of just mix it. So it's so much quicker than having to search for that pastel that's just the right color. So I really like to establish my color variety here and just making these marks. Now, I'm not pressing real hard into the pastel. Depending, like if I press a little lighter into the pan pastel, I'll get a little less pigment on there. If I really need a lot of pigment, I'll press a little harder. So I'm just kind of feel like I'm painting here. I'm making a mark, and again, I use the same sponge. I am not concerned at all about it getting muddy or dirty. I just wipe it off 2 or 3 times very quickly. Now this is sped up, so I didn't want for you to have to sit through. I think this took me, it's probably not quite 2 hours, probably about an hour and a half. And I'm being very loose here and not worrying too much about perfection. I'm thinking of this as an underpainting, which is actually a great way to think of it, because that keeps you from trying to fill in a shape. I actually like to make my flowers bigger than what they really need to be, because my favorite part, and you see I just did that with putting that little bit of yellow in between those that red petal, is because I love to carve my shapes with when I get to the background. So sometimes I'll just press the the Pan Pastel tool on there and see if I can get a mark. Sometimes, see, I can just kind of almost printed it. And I can also like move it around, which is what I'm doing there. You can just see how fast I moved, and I kind of blended it a little bit just to kind of mix it together, which I think it's so much fun. And I'm just kind of loosely doing this, kind of like with a paintbrush. So to me, I feel like it's kind of a mix of painting and pastel at the same time. And when you make marks with your tool, and you'd make a couple of them, every time you make a mark, less pastel is on there, so it automatically gives you a different value, which makes it even more painterly and more fun. You can see that happen just there where I was putting in that dark kind of olive yellow color, and it started dark and then it got lighter. So now I'm coming back in and I'm putting some of the, I think it's um, day lily yellow or something like that. I forget the names of these, but it's a very light yellow, and I'm establishing some lights and darks. I just went back and did, I think I'm doing some dark blue here. I also did some black. I did some of the magenta because I don't want it to be just the black. I want some variety in my lights and my darks. So I do use the lights of various colors. If I want the light to be warm, I'll use a yellow, or I'll use the pink, and maybe I'll use both. And then there's also a light green and a light violet and even light blues that I'll put in there if I want my highlight to be on the cooler side. So I'm getting those highlights in there where I see them. I know I'm sorry, the reference photo is a bit cut off there, but I think you can get the gist of it. That's my reference over there. So I'm going back and just adding a little more to it. So every time you see my pastel tool go away, I'm wiping it off and I'm dipping into maybe a different color. So now I'm getting another little flower that's in the background. So it's interesting, I watched Steffi Clark do her demo, and she actually starts by doing the entire background and then with pan pastels, and then she works on top of it with the regular pastels. I actually like to do the opposite. I like to do the flowers first, and then I go back with the regular pastel to do the background. Now, sometimes I might do the background with the pans as well, which is really nice. It's just depending on I guess the power of the color that I want. It was interesting. I took this workshop 2 years ago from Christine Swan. It was called The Power of Pastel. And she was talking about using the hard pastels and the pastel pencils, which didn't have as much power. And she would always say those are the ones you start with. And I'm like, well, the pan pastels are actually the least amount of power. I could use a hard pastel on top of these. So I would say that the pan pastels are the least powerful, then the pastel pencils, then the hard pastels, then the medium pastels, and then of course the super softs, so the schmankies and the senneliers and the blue earth. That's what I will end with very often. So I'm getting a little bit more detail in there. So as you can see here, I'm kind of put the pans away, and I'm popping in some color with the regular sticks here. I'm just looking at my reference, kind of squinting the whole time as I do this. And you can see that that dark is much darker than the darks I was able to get with the pans. So I went from a fairly, I guess, limited value range, even though it didn't look like it at first. But I ended up pushing the value range by adding some Terry Ludwig eggplant and then some very light neutrals, and then eventually the lightest lights. So I'll pull out the super soft light pastels. And so I don't like to do, even if I use the pure white in the pan pastel, it's still not going to be as bright white as a sennelier or a schmanke, which I think schmanke is probably the lightest white that there is. And of course the Terry Ludwig eggplant is the darkest there is, besides some of their blacks and maybe a sennelier black. So I'm carving out some of my flower shapes with not only the darks but the lights. So now I'm just using some other pastels. Some of them are soft, some of them are hard pastels. Now, a lot of times with those lines, I'm using a stick right there, but very often I will actually use the sponge to get those lines, and I'll dip the sponge, the corner of the sponge, the length of it, in the darkest, maybe the black or the extra, one of the extra dark colors, and I'll just lay it on the corner and just, I don't even have to move it, I just have to tap it and it will deposit that pastel right on there. And that's actually, there was a painting I did with a cat, and at the very end I took the edge of that sponge, dipped it in the white, and that's how I did his whiskers. Boom, 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 very, very quickly. Now working on a couple of those details. I saw that flower has some dark colors behind it, so I'm pressing pretty hard with the yellow to go on top. So you can see how I carved that out. So what I'm doing at the very end is I'm zooming in to a few areas, not all of them, because I don't want everything to be in super focus. But there's a couple little places that, I feel like I want the viewer's eye to go. And that's where I will, as Adrian Giuliani says, little moment of reality. So I really observe my reference or life or whatever it is I'm working from, and I will make that little area be very crisp and detailed, or I will make it very, look exactly like it looks, and leave a lot of the rest of it a little bit looser. Another thing I like to do is I like to really push those values and exaggerate some of the lights and darks and the contrasts. And well, here I'm zooming into one of the flowers. So here is my little moment of reality. And I'm kind of carving in some of those other petals that were on top of it. Getting some more warmth in there. The floor on the right side of the vase, it wasn't that light or that purple, but I always like to have that little shine on the opposite side to get that feeling of dimension and make it pop. But one of the things I do like about the pans, if you've started some of your shapes with it, is let some of them stay really soft, because those are like automatic soft edges. And I feel like a lot of times when people are working with just the sticks, all their edges are hard. There's almost no way to get a super hard edge with the pan pastels. They're so soft already. And then if you let them kind of blend together when you're doing the background, or let some of the background, I think the part where I put the background in was cut off, but I will let the pastel, so the purple in the back, that kind of neutral purple, is a stick, and I use the side of it and I let it kind of come on a little bit to some of my flowers, especially in the background. So I'm just establishing those little moments of reality, pushing some of my darks in that red zinnia, which those are the coolest flowers. I'm like, I got to get some and plant them in my yard. I had little baby ones, not any of these big ones. So these were all flowers from my neighbor, who has these gorgeous zinnia and black-eyed Susan. And then that white flower is a straw flower, which they're already like dried and hard. And I love those flowers. I want to plant some of those too. She said that they really dry nicely as well. So I will be keeping those. She only let me have 3. She had more than that. But she didn't want it. She's like, you can't take this one. I love it. So she's obviously going to be drying hers as well. So this has just been about a little over 15 minutes. We can get the gist of it so that you can join us in the workshop. Hopefully you have either some, I prefer to work on a dark color, but you can see here I worked on a lighter neutral. This was Pastel Premier. The only one I really don't like to use for pans is Luxe Archival. I do like UArt Black. I like using Canson Touch. And again, I like to use, a color because then depending on what I'm working on, sometimes I'll even start with the lights, and that's an option too, especially if you're working on a dark. So I will hopefully see you guys at the workshop or another time. Thanks for watching.